So the last time that I spoke to you, the Edmonton Oilers were in a Battle of Alberta playoff series, the first one in 30 years, and they had just tied up the series. They had had a rough game one, came back, won game two, and I gotta say, these videos are a lot more fun to shoot, when all of the players that a lot of people have been picking on have just had a huge game to vindicate themselves. We haven't seen that yet in the Western Conference Final. Right now, the series is 2-0 for Colorado. Coming back to Edmonton, that's going to kick off tomorrow. I mean, as I film this, the date is Friday, June the 3rd. And as much as things hardly look spectacular right now, hey, you know what? This series it's no more than half over. It's not over yet. I mean, if you do need to take solace in something, keep in mind that the Corgi predicted that the series would have gone exactly this way, that Colorado was going to win the first two games, and then Edmonton was going to win the next two games, and then Colorado was going to win Game 5, and then Edmonton was going to win Game 6 and 7 to win this series in 7 games. So, hey, right now, don't worry about it. It's exactly as the Corgi foretold it. And here on the 100 Degrees podcast, we believe in Corgis. But of course, that's not actually what I'm here to talk to you about this week. What I'm here to talk about is something that's kind of a leftover topic from the last series, and that topic is Matt Tkachuk. Absolutely notorious amongst Oilers fans, we do not like Matt Tkachuk. Actually, we kind of hate Matt Tkachuk. A lot of that goes back to a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic hit. So this would have been all the way back in... God, that would have been, I believe it would have been in 2020. The infamous game where Matt Tkachuk kept going after Zach Kassian and just laying these dirty hits on him. And then, he drew a bunch of penalties when Zach wouldn't tried to fight back. And then in the very next game against Edmonton, between the Oilers and the Calgary Flames, was that iconic, it was the first Battle of Alberta like it, in probably more than 10 years. It was fights. Mike Smith fought Cam Talbot at center ice. And of course, Zach Kassian got his revenge on Matt Tkachuk. And ever since then, people have kind of called Matt Tkachuk the Turtle. And so it's no great secret, Edmonton Oilers fans really, really hate Matt Tkachuk. But really, when you think about it, we shouldn't. It's one of those things where it's kind of really, really easy and very, very tempting to assume that the player that you see on the ice is the person that he is. And Matt Tkachuk embodies all of, for lack of any better phrase, the best, the most classic and the most classic and enduring, attributes of the archetype of player that we call the pest. And I think that the best way to describe that player is he's kind of like Shorzy from Letterkenny. He's mouthy. He'll play right up to the edge of dirty, and sometimes they do go a little bit past it, but just enough so that they can actually get the referees to protect them. It's the kind of player that absolutely infuriates opposing players, and they absolutely infuriate opposing fans. And if you have a player like that on your team, then you love him. If you're playing against if your team is playing against a player like that, then you absolutely despise him, and that's Matt Tkachuk. And that's Matt Tkachuk, the hockey player. Very different concept, very, very different and distinct thing from Matt Tkachuk, the player. Because what was one thing that Matt Tkachuk did during these playoffs? Well, he scored a hat trick in Game 1. I know that a lot of Oilers fans, we definitely did not appreciate that. And then after that, he kind of started to disappear from the score sheet a little bit. Wasn't as big a factor in the series. But that doesn't mean that the hat trick in Game 1 was the only thing that he did. The other thing that he did during these playoffs, he came out and he did the same thing that the LA Kings came out and did. And he pledged his support for Ben Stelter. So Ben Stelter, for anybody who may be joining us for the first time, who isn't an Edmonton Oilers fan, or maybe even isn't even a hockey fan, although I'd wonder why you're watching this particular segment of this particular podcast. But Ben Stelter, of course, is the 5-year-old with cancer that is, that has become. I wouldn't really go so far as to say. I think a lot of people would say mascot. I don't think that's a fair assessment of what exactly he means to this team. But he has definitely been a source of inspiration for this team. I really do think that inspiration has been something that this team has really failed to grab a hold of at times in the past. And it's definitely been a difference maker in this postseason so far, and it could be a difference maker in this postseason starting tomorrow night and Monday night. That very well could be the case. And I think that on the one hand, I mean, Matt Tkachuk coming out and pledging his support for Ben Stelter in his fight against cancer, really it shouldn't be that much of a surprising thing. And the more that you think about it, the less surprising that it is. But it is something that reminds us that the player that we see on the ice is definitely not the person that he is. And I think that going forward, we as Oilers fans, I think that we should have a very difficult time really hating Matt Tkachuk. Maybe outside of 2 hours a few times a year.